And Brian, welcome to the podcast. Can you give the listeners a little bit of insight into your background and what you do currently and what we're essentially going to talk about today?
Yeah, 100% Carl. Thanks for having me. So my background is in it's 10 years ago now. I finished a degree in human nutrition, which seems like a long time ago. And then I've been working in the industry as a nutritionist and a nutrition coach since 2017. And through that period, I was working with a lot of different types of clients, but started to see more and more of the sort of disordered eating type presentations. Um, and because I kind of had a liking to say cognitive behavior therapy, which is sort of informed by Stoic philosophy in terms of there's a lot of underpinnings of Stoicism into CBT and in terms of how we have it in the modern day. So there's the kind of a flow there. And I suppose I was helping people with that kind of thing. And then just doing my own sort of like learning on the topics. But the more people I started to work with in terms of having disordered eating with a lot of success, I'd like to say. Um, I did just want to advance my expertise in terms of being able to work with people with actually clinically relevant eating disorders. Because there is this spectrum from like normal eating to eating disorder, and then kind of disordered eating is kind of more over that little side of the clinically diagnosed eating disorders. So I want to be able to help people with that. So that has brought me to coming to the end now of a 2-year master's in cognitive behavior therapy. So I'll be qualified fully very shortly as a CBT psychotherapist. Um, that's not the only type of therapy I use in practice. I use some other third wave approaches, as they're called, things like acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, a bit of compassion focused therapy. So it's kind of integrative, but they're all in kind of the broader CBT heading without bogging anyone down in the details. But um, that's where I'm at now. And then, as you know, I'm doing this research project. Like the last step of this master's is to finish my dissertation. And I've been doing clinical practice then as part of the master's for the last 13 months. So I've done quite a lot of like actual client sessions at this stage, more formally.
Yeah.
Um, Mostly for people who have eating disorders, disordered eating, body image issues. Sometimes there's like adjunct things like depression or anxiety to treat within that's causing the eating problems. But yeah, this brings me to the research that I'm doing, which is in binge eating, in men in Ireland specifically, and specifically in the gym going population. So that's kind of a quick
What
overview.
what inspired you to explore that topic specifically in terms of, gym going men?
Yeah, gym going man. Well, first of all, there's a practical element, to be honest, where I think I could get my so I'm using a survey questionnaire that I've distributed, and I thought I'd have a better chance of getting enough respondents, leveraging connections in the fitness industry in Ireland, basically. But I'm also interested because like some of the research questions I had were, you know, even someone with say quote unquote normal BMI or healthy BMI, are they experiencing similar rates of binge eating to, say, overweight or obese, which, it does seem to have higher rates in that type of population. But um, I'm just interested because of the kind of body image side of things, the body dissatisfaction, how that can interplay within, people who are obviously training and maybe for men, in particular, pursuing muscularity potentially, in terms of the uh, body image idealization. Like for men, it's not quite just like the thin ideal. It's more into the muscularity side of things. So that's a little bit different and something I think worth exploring in that specific gym going population. So there's a few reasons there that I wanted to um explore it in that population specifically. And then for men, it's just because like if we go down the levels, mental health research in men is not that prolific. Eating disorders, even less so. And then yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to contribute to because if we have something like binge eating disorder, as it's clinically defined,
Mhm.
is the most common of all eating disorders. Um, so the global point prevalence it's called. So that would be like if you just took a snapshot of like the entire world right now,
Yeah.
how many people have binge eating disorder? It's estimated about 1%, which is a lot of people like when you consider the entire global population, right? And there doesn't seem to be a difference between high income, low income countries. So it's not isolated in that sense. It doesn't seem to be. And then in terms of the lifetime prevalence, it's about 1 to 3% of men. So that means that at any point in time, they will have met the criteria for binge eating disorder.
Mm.
And then it's a little bit higher in women at 3 to 5%. But there's still a lot of men that obviously experience it. And then when I looked, so throughout the masters that I was doing, like anytime we were told to like do an assignment, we'd usually be given a bit of autonomy on what that would look like. But I always just picked eating disorders because that's my main area of interest in the work that I do, right? Because I do nutrition coaching and now I combine it with therapy and try to have it that way. So I was always just by default doing a lot of reading on different eating disorders, a lot of binge eating, a lot of anorexia. I just saw that like, when you see the research studies done on binge eating sort of treatment, it was 10 to 20% of participants were men. Even though there's a lot more than that in the population that are experiencing binge eating. So there's a mismatch there because like, for some of the other eating disorders, like it is more biased towards women, it seems that have those. So it sort of makes sense that more of the research. Sorry, do you want to come in?
No, sorry, no, no, keep talking. I was just going to ask, why do you think it is so underrepresented in men? Just to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few potential reasons. I think like being able to recognize it is problematic. Like there's a difference there. I can see men not even being aware of it, or even if they do seek support, it's not getting picked up because there's more of this like, you're a fella, like you have a good appetite kind of stuff, which is not quite the same for women. So that's kind of tropes coming into it. And if you look at, say, some of the criteria for diagnosing binge eating disorder, which would be you have to binge eat at least once a week over a period of 3 months,
Hmm.
where a binge is defined as eating well, in most cases, eating an objectively large amount of food in a short space of time with some other criteria, such as going to the point where you feel overly full or you feel sick. You might do it alone or in isolation for a shame things. You don't want people to see the amount that you're eating. You might eat a lot faster than usual, and then feel quite like guilty, disgusted, etc. after doing that. And then there has to be some amount of distress associated with the binging itself. Um, so some of those things could be missed, I think, and or maybe not considered that like, oh, this is actually a problem that I could have. Um, and then, just kind of it is kind of obvious in the literature that eating disorders are seen as kind of a feminine topic. So men I think are less likely probably to even be aware first of all, but then even if they do seek treatment, like the some of the stats on that are like obviously depending where you look, but some of the ones that I've seen are 50% of people with binge eating disorder will seek treatment. It might take an average of 6 years for them to get that treatment.
Wow.
And then I've looked at some more specific, if I recall correctly, to like psychotherapy treatment, which would be the main best treatment for eating disorders in general.
Yeah.
Um, that being generous, like 30 to 50% use evidence-based practice for eating disorders. So again, if we have more levels there, it's like, all right, if 50% seek treatment or 50% get treatment, I should say, only half of those again maybe getting or less even maybe getting evidence-based treatment. That's a little bit of a tangent, but I think there's probably issues with men seeking treatment and then also getting picked up because like if maybe if you go down to your GP and you say, oh, hey, I've been struggling with this, it may be a bit hit or miss as to whether the GP will take that seriously. You
Mm.
know, again, this kind of stigmatization of eating disorders and things like that. So like it could be kind of fobbed off as like, you just have a good appetite, you like to eat a lot of food. And in the same breath, I'll probably tell you like, oh, you need to lose weight actually as well, you know.
Mm. Yeah,
Uh,
they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, kind of thing.
it's maybe a bit cynical of me, but yeah, sorry, that to answer your
Well,
question
that's
eventually.
that's that's insane percentages of like, it might take them 6 years, and then, if they do actually get treated, or they're not dismissed, then even less than that, some of it's not even going to be evidence-based treatments. Could you distinguish the difference between, treating someone evidence-based versus maybe someone falling into the category of, being helped with non-evidence-based treatments?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like I had to do some assignments there recently, like one being a reflective assignment of all the like few hundred hours of practice I've done over the last year. Um, so that was definitely getting me thinking of like, well, you need to be able to justify why you take a certain treatment approach. Like this is what I didn't write this, but like you can't just go on vibes and be like, well, I'm doing therapy, I'm being present with the person, I'm satisfying the core conditions. But like in terms of what it does seem to be evidence-based, it would be cognitive behavior therapy, and there is a type of CBT that's designed for eating disorders. So it's called CBT enhanced or CBTE, as it's referred to. That has by far the largest evidence base for treatment of eating disorders, and that extends to binge eating as well. The treatment of anorexia is a little bit. It's not as convincing. Like there's a few different options that seem equally good for the treatment of anorexia, but for say bulimia and binge eating disorder, cognitive behavior therapy seems to be the best, but within that camp, it should be based on what I've seen that specific type of CBT, which it doesn't look hugely different from some say good nutrition practices because some of that treatment is genuinely getting regular meals in throughout the day, for example, keeping a food diary, monitoring kind of emotions, monitoring where the binges are. So there's kind of self-monitoring that comes into it.
Yeah.
But then the more therapeutic side of the treatment is looking at what would be some of the main, I suppose, driving factors for someone to have binge eating. So it would be things like perfectionism comes up a lot. There's this is common amongst most eating disorders, but the overvaluation of weight and shape
Mm.
as a important thing, which then leads to greater body dissatisfaction and poor body image, which can lead to things like dieting and excess dietary restriction and restraint, which is a major potential driving factor as well. And that's how you get people into like trying to fast all day or eat as little as possible and then binging at night. But low self-esteem comes into it, and then a lot of what I would work with is kind of the emotional side as well. So like people using it as a coping mechanism, either to blunt difficult emotions. It
Mm.
doesn't have to be like negative emotions necessarily, but I don't want to go into too much detail on this because like it's sort of varies from person to person. But
Yeah.
like someone could have just difficulty in general with feeling, say, big emotions, whether they're positive or negative. So
Mm.
a lot of it depends on their background and their upbringing and stuff. But um, the general mood tolerance, emotional tolerance comes into it, and that would be why I bring in some other sort of therapeutic treatments aside from CBTE specifically, because say like dialectical behavior therapy or DBT, that was designed for borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by a lot of kind of difficulties with mood tolerance. So
Mm.
you can translate that to something like helping people emotionally regulate to avoid things like emotionally driven binge eating
Mhm.
and bulimia, or purging tendencies. Um, so there's that, and then so there's not as much research on that, let's say, compared to CBT, but the little bit that's there, I think, is quite promising.
Yeah.
Um, Interpersonal therapy, as it's called as well, which again, this is another kind of feature of why people might have issues with binge eating, is like just interpersonal difficulties, like so relationships, lack of relationships, these kind of things, are one of the big contributing factors as well. So there is a type of therapy for that if that seems to be the main reason that someone is having difficulty with these things. Um, so there's those, and yeah, and then I think like sort of some mindfulness combined CBT approaches seem to work well. Acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a CBT kind of format, but different. The way it's delivered is a bit different, and the kind of spirit of it is a little bit different. But when I think about these things, I do think that they're more similar than they are different in
Mhm.
terms of the treatment approaches. So I think that's why you probably see success somewhat across the board with some of these things.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover.
I think so. I think like again from I'm obviously still a novice at the therapeutic aspect, but um from thinking about it and looking at sort of the research on it, yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of crossover. So
Mm.
a lot of the principles I think are quite similar, and then it's just the methods are somewhat different, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
It's kind of like with diets and nutrition. It's like satisfying similar principles of like, how people relate to their thoughts and emotions influencing behavior. Like there's many different ways to approach that in a therapeutic sense. It doesn't have to be just like the pure like CBT way, like the ACT way works pretty well too. So those are the evidence-based treatments. And I think that, that's where someone should start in that sense. And obviously a lot of good like nutritionists and stuff can support in some of
Where
these.
where are the statistics coming from? People practicing non-evidence based? Is that like, cowboys online pretending that they can solve your binge eating disorder?
Well, I mean, there is that,
Yeah.
and I think, like if I recall correctly, what I'm talking about there in the lack of evidence-based treatment is actually within psychotherapy.
Okay.
There's actually therapists not using evidence-based methods, um, in the treatment, which is pretty wild, and that's why I was saying like, when I was reflecting on the way I was treating people, it's like you have to be able to justify
Yeah.
why you do certain things. So like if
That's
that's
what that's
within,
that's wild in itself. That
yeah,
that's yeah.
that's within evidence-based.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's within evidence-based treatment in that psychotherapy is the better treatment method. But then if we go outside of that
Yeah.
and like what you said, people who just claim that they can resolve your binge eating,
Mm,
and like it depends on what they're practicing because like I said, there's some aspects of say CBT that I think overlap a lot with say coaching, right? Because I do, and that's something that I've really reflected on a lot over the last year. Like, geez, there is a lot of overlap between the two. They're not the same, and they never will be the same if someone's sort of aware of the differences. But there is a huge degree of overlap, especially like I'm sort of assuming person-centered coaching as opposed to like
yeah.
drill
Like
sergeant
yeah,
coaching.
yeah, yeah. Like coaching and not instructing and not being like telling someone what to do, but trying to guide
Yeah,
them into a path that is beneficial for them.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, and like I don't want to just say that everybody should be a therapist to help people with something like binge eating. Now, if it's like a clinical manifestation, then maybe yeah, you probably should. But like,
For the listeners, can you kind of distinguish the difference between like clinical binge eating and like subclinical binge eating or
yeah, I will. I suppose I like to throw in that like I don't care too much about the specifics of that stuff because like that's yeah, I mean like you need the categorization, but like I would often just boil it down to like, look, is your eating behavior causing you distress?
Mm.
And in that case, then is it binge eating? If so, then it's worth getting support because when you look at say subclinical binge eating, the rates are much higher, right? So if we get into the subclinical levels, it's more like 8%, like of men and women, and then if you look within certain age brackets, it can be higher again. So the most prevalent in, say, subclinical disordered eating, sorry, that's to encompass all disordered eating, not just binging specifically, but it's between like the group is like a 15 to 24, I think. And then it's between like 15 and 30% almost. So
Mm.
like that's a lot more people than who are meeting the clinical criteria, which was the at least once a week for at least 3 months.
Mhm.
Those criteria around what a binge is in terms of like eating a lot of food in a short space of time, feeling overly full. It's like three of the five of like feeling really full, feeling distressed, doing it in isolation. Um, what are the other ones? The yeah, feeling like disgusted, depressed.
Do you have any thoughts on why that age category would be more prevalent?
Well, it does seem like the most, say, eating disorders develop in adolescence,
Okay.
right? That's capturing that group. If it's 15 to 24, right? Um, yeah, and then you could ask me like, well, why is that? Like, why do adolescents seem to develop it more so? Like some of the factors that, and that's for all disordered eating, right? So you can imagine that, say, like anorexia, for example. Um, obviously it's not being clinically classed in that sense, but like the tendencies, but I would probably point some of it back to like, how it is to be a teenager, the social pressures, the lack of compassion at times. Because like one of the biggest, well, sorry, one of the big, that's kind of extreme language, but an important contributor to something like binge eating is being bullied about your weight as a child or adolescent, So there's those components of it. It can be a difficult time, I think, objectively, for people in terms of growing up. There may be the interpersonal difficulties depending on what the, familial environment is like. The kind of genetic um, contribution to eating disorders can be quite high, in fact. So for anorexia and bulimia, it's between like 70 to 80% genetic contribution,
Wow.
is quite significant. It's not so much for binge eating disorder, it's about 40%. Um, but that points to, that's a very significant component that genetics can play a role in this, and that's a lot, like objectively. Um, so yeah, those are some of the reasons I suppose why it's probably more prevalent in that younger age group. Um, I again maybe like this maybe not objective science, but like our body image concerns worse in that age group, quite likely, I think, I don't have like stats on that, but I would say so. That's the case.
Do you have any advice for parents who might be listening to this, who might be thinking, "No, this is something that is quite high to happen in adolescence," and is there anything that I can do in the family home to reduce the likelihood of this happening to my child?
Yeah, so for binge eating specifically, and this may be extends to other aspects of eating disorders as well, but there are such thing as like familial protective factors. So regular family meal times being one of them, the talk about food, the talk about bodies, the criticism about bodies, the basically like if your family is a family that does not appear to overvalue weight and shape, that is very protective. So that's the kind of body image. And but like I see so much of this in practice where like I'm treating daughters of mothers who had like they're grown up and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah,
Mothers have the same issues basically and sort of passed some of that on to them. Um, and there is that issue with like, talking about somebody about how they look, like, oh, geez, she's such and such has put on a lot of weight there, hasn't she? It's like that kind of talk is very unhelpful.
yeah. Generational diet. And can I tell you a story about a client that I had actually? And she told me a really powerful story when we were discussing this, and she told me about how, she suffered with her relationship with food, up until her 40s, and she told me a story of when she was younger, and she used to watch her mum basically pick herself apart in the mirror and say like, I hate this about my arms, and I hate this about my waist, and I hate this about my hips and stuff like this. And she her as a child, I think she was like 6 or 7, watching, observing this, and she said that I looked exactly like my mum. And like what was that the story that basically the mum was basically telling the daughter by picking herself apart that, I hate this about myself and you look exactly like me, and therefore I am going to grow up with this body dysfunction as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like that kind of self-attacking
Mm,
and say children seeing that, excuse me, being aware of it. You can see it with, how people talk about food or how they eat. Like, oh, I'm being good today. I'm not eating the chocolate or whatever it is, or I'm being bold today. I am having the cake. Because that all just sort of creates a narrative around food and bodies and the sense of self-worth attached to bodies versus it being broader than that. That's where that overvaluation of, just physical shape kind of objectification of the self and objectification of others. All that is super like unhelpful. Um, some of their so they're kind of like more familial, environmental, protective factors. Um, that would extend to like kids, peers. What's that network like? How do they value those things?
mm,
And it's like, where does that come from? So that's like there's components of like media literacy about this stuff that are going to be important. Um, Fostering body appreciation and again things like body functionality appreciation and
mhm.
thinking about the whole self and not just like, oh, you lost your weight, you look great,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Can you go into that on a body functionality as well, and in terms of like tips or advice for people listening in terms of the actual talk around bodies?
Yeah, sure. So this is an exercise that's evidence-based to foster more positive body image, and I use it in most of my check-ins, right? So I have these questions in my check-ins with clients. So one of them is, pick one thing that you're grateful for your body in how you've been able to experience life.
Hmm.
That's me paraphrasing it slightly, but that's basically what it is. So what, in practical terms, you can think about this in terms of the five senses. If you have access to all of your five senses, of course. But what does like the body facilitates everything in that sense, right? So it's trying to extend it beyond just what it looks like. It's like your body facilitates you being able to hug a loved one, right? So there's a like that's feeling in terms of the five senses. It helps you you know experience like see a nice sunset or flowers or it carries you through a nice walk. And people in my experience doing this with people, clients often get very focused on just the physical capacity side, which is important. But
Hmm.
then I also like, so they say like, oh, it enabled me to like do a hard training session, those kind of things, like all about like what the body does. But then I just talked to them about the kind of five senses component. And it's like, think about everything like taste, smell, um, hearing words of affirmation from someone that you care about. Like none of that happens without the body, right? In terms of it facilitating that. So it's a lot more than just, how defined are your abs, or how white are your teeth kind of stuff. So that's the idea.
Speaking on back onto men and binge eating, did you find or do you think in terms of like gym culture, do you think that's kind of a net positive or a net negative in regards to the prevalence of binge eating in men?
Good question. Yeah, I mean it's tricky to answer maybe, but like you're gonna consider to what degree is there internalization of cultural body ideals.
Mm,
So if we think about the kind of flow of how these things can happen, not to say that they will happen this way, but how they can happen for people who are at least susceptible to these things.
yeah.
I want to be jacked and lean. Right. What do I need to do to make that happen? Right. I need to train. Like that could mean training a reasonable amount, could mean training excessively. I need to get my diet in order. So what does that mean to me? Do I try overly restrictive diets that are very restrained? And then if I break it, so to speak, does that contribute to my binge eating? Like that's often how it can happen. Um, but like that's sort of driven by the body idealization and trying to pursue that. So it depends on what kind of message I suppose men are picking up from that. Because like I mean, it's a bit of a shit show on social media in terms of um those aspects of things, you know. And then like again, I mean, this is kind of stuff that's been happening for a long time, you know, but it's just maybe more becoming more prevalent for men in like modern times,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
Yeah, you've probably seen that kind of evolution of the action figure.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
as an
brilliant.
example.
Yeah. And
Mm.
like this distorted view of like what like a male physique is supposed to look like, or did you see that trend? There's a trend going on, Instagram and TikTok, and it's like this lad who was, you know, he might be just into the gym or he's a PT or whatever, and he's been like lifting weights for the last 15 years, but like he's not on gear or anything. Like, and he goes, this is what like a normal body looks like after like 15 years of weight training, and like it's just he's in decent shape, like he looks good, but like it's a normal physique. And then all the comments are like from like probably 15-year-olds and 14-year-olds saying like, oh, you need to do this or you need to do this, and all basically like criticizing his physique because they're probably so distorted looking at like the 0.001% of the population that's a genetic freak and also taking steroids.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. Like, I actually quite enjoying that. Obviously, not the criticism that they're getting, but the I suppose bringing a reality check to it. But like, yeah, so many people in the comments being like, "Oh, bro, you need to get a refund for the last 50."
Yeah, yeah.
Like Jesus Christ, like
Yeah. But
people are in good shape and they're taking care of themselves. You know,
yeah.
that is a big part of like fostering a good relation with food, a good relation with your body. Is like doing things from a place of self-care,
Mm,
not self-loathing, that
mm,
I'm not good enough as I am, therefore I need to change. The process becomes quite punitive. Whereas if we can frame it as self-care, making compassionate choices
yeah.
for my benefit on the whole, um, things tend to go a lot better. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose part of the research, the reason I'm looking at this kind of research, like I said, is that I want to see, you know, is there even maybe uh, what's the kind of rate of binge eating behavior in men who are training that maybe are not overweight or obese. I know I said that I think at the start, but
Mm,
um, I am interested to see that and to see like levels of body dissatisfaction is one of the things I'm looking at in the questionnaire that I have. So levels of body dissatisfaction in again normal say BMI
yeah.
people. Now I'm aware and I'll write this into the limitations and stuff that like BMI especially in a gym going population is maybe even less useful because like I'm overweight BMI based on BMI
Mm,
despite being at a healthy level of body fat and everything else.
yeah.
So there is that kind of like contribution of muscle. But look, we'll see what comes back from it when I do the data analysis. And then, because it's already fairly well established that, obese or overweight people will have more prevalence of binge eating, let's say. It's a common thing that goes together, which kind of makes sense if there's excessive amounts of calories being consumed on a somewhat of a regular basis. Like it's hard to not be overweight or obese in that context. And that's where the differential is between that and bulimia is there's in binge eating, there's no compensatory in binge eating disorder, there's no compensatory behavior. Um so I mean I'm just thinking another so I gave a lecture recently in Athlone talking about disordered eating in athletes. So that encompasses all disordered eating, but like essentially rates of disordered eating are much higher in athletic populations than
Mm.
not. So
They're
that
not.
does than not. So they're
Okay.
higher in athletes basically disordered
Yeah.
eating, and higher within athletes than within like weight class sports or
Ah.
what they call gravity defying sports. Where
Mm,
there's like some element of lower body weight being more beneficial. So I mean, like that's not the same as people who go to the gym, but there's some degree of like similarity in that in terms of like athletes versus people training.
mm. What is so in terms of that's an interesting in terms of athletes and people who play sport and also weight centered sports as well. So what is the reason for that? Obviously, because hyper focused on weight constantly and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the fixations on it. The kind of again the culture around it, like the culture in the sport. You hear a lot of stories in Ireland about, sort of like just club level GA teams getting like caliper tests and stuff like that. And, I've worked with people that have been told who, if they didn't lose X amount of weight, that they'd be dropped off the team, so the pressure, and, and some of those people have binge eating as a result, like, because it fed them into that pathway when they were susceptible to it. Um, and yeah, there's this kind of, again, the cultural presentation of athletes and the what we call like the athlete identity as well. So there's like a certain way you're supposed to look potentially if you are an athlete, and that's
Mm.
it's kind of like the body image stuff as well, but just applied to athletes. And then I find like it's interesting. You can have a difference between like the athletic identity and then just the person separate from that. So, for example, I've worked with some people who might have like, let's say, women higher levels of muscle mass, and they feel great when they're in a training context, like say they're doing like high
Mm.
rocks or CrossFit, but then they're on a night out, and all of a sudden I don't like my arms because they're too big, and I feel conscious of them.
That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so and it was the kind of pressure of the sport, right? The
Yeah.
pressure to perform, pressure to, um, yeah, like just maybe poor education in some of those contexts as well, in terms of properly fueling and, but that, I mean, to be fair, I made this point in that lecture that, like, you know, people can fall into low energy availability and under eating just out of kind of ignorance and not because it's disordered, but
Mm.
a lot of disordered eating will contribute to that because people are eating less and, again, trying to control their body composition quite tightly and getting quite focused on that. And then, of course, if they can't do it, or they eventually, break, and then they binge, and that's where that comes from. So that kind of pressure of meeting the athletic ideal maybe, is definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And in terms of the actual survey that you did as well, how difficult or easy was it to get men to disclose this information? Because I presume doing this research it can be quite difficult if there's a cultural attitude around you know men not talking about this or it not being a very open discussion.
Yeah, it's like I use that example um in the lecture as well, like, as I have, or and I just talk about this in general, that like I have had plenty of clients who are, men and athletes and stuff like that, who struggle with this stuff. They don't want anyone to know about it. It's
Mm,
like they don't want to talk about it. They don't, because, I could tell you prominent athletes who deal with this stuff, and then of course I help them, and they get better, but they never want me to share any kind of testimonials or anything because
mm.
they don't want to be identifiable um, in this, which is a shame. I understand why it is, of course, but it's a shame. But I just like to talk about that more and more now because, like, again,
Yeah,
I don't like a lot of
you're
lads.
you're not in the business of easy marketing with your line of work.
No, no, at least not towards men. Like, I think, again, women, I think, are a bit more forthcoming and seeking
Mm,
help in general. It definitely seems to be the case for women. Um, because, again, there's this kind of, like, what would you say, gender roles in terms of like masculinity, femininity.
mhm,
Um, so I do try and get that point across because I know there's a lot of people out there that probably feel like they're the only one that's struggling with this on the team or whatever, on the GA team that they're playing with. But in terms of recruiting people, it's been going pretty well, to be fair. I have asked a lot of people like yourself to share and try and get the word out. Now, my initial plan was to and I had sort of teed this up to share it amongst some gyms in Ireland, and one of those has just not been responding to me since. I obviously won't say who it is, but they were going to have several thousand members. that I was hoping to distribute it amongst. And if half of those were men, just take it as guess, like say half of them are
Yeah.
men, I'd only need a very small percentage to actually respond. So I was optimistic about that, but that hasn't come through. But that's
Did they give any reason as to why?
no, I just haven't responded to my
Mm,
messages. Um, yeah, so I may try and do like reach out to some other ones just to, or even people have like smaller training operation or gym operations, let's say. Um, because I do need to get a few more, and I don't have too much longer that I can leave it out.
yeah.
Because I need time to do the analysis and write it all up. So, yeah, I don't need that many more to kind of have like the minimum viable. Now you could argue that like there is no minimum viable because it's like a master's level. It's a taught master's, it's not a research master's
Mhm.
necessarily. So like, but I am trying to make it good and more valuable rather than just ticking a box. So I would like to get another few responses on it. Another kind of 30 or so would be good as of today. But anyway, I've gotten that many more than that in one day.
Yeah.
So like it's definitely not. Uh, so I like again, I don't know. I've been getting people to share it. Obviously, a certain amount of people have gone and clicked through and done it, and I've been trying to. Oh, sorry, not that I've tried, but like I suppose the point, you don't have to be having issues with your eating to do the survey. I just wonder if
Mm,
that's clear because this like you're eligible to do the survey if you're a lad and you're over the age of 18
mhm.
and you're going to the gym
Yeah.
in Ireland. That's all I need, you know.
Yeah.
And then whatever comes through in terms of people who have trouble with their eating, will it come through as being similar to those, percentages that I said earlier? Like
Mm,
that's all it's really going to establish and just see what the rates are, in this kind of population, which is maybe not entirely representative of all of men in Ireland because, there's only a certain amount that are obviously partaking in say, gym training. So yeah, so it's somewhat of a specific population in that sense, but yeah, it hasn't been too hard to get people. I think just some things didn't go according to plan, and if I need to go and just DM people one by one, I'll do that. Like, because there's a lot like that has happened a lot as well. It's like I've asked somebody like that I know fairly well. I was like, oh, have you done that yet? And like, oh shit, no,
nudge, nudge,
I
nudge.
meant to do it and I just
Yeah.
forgot. That does happen.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I might put out like a call to action. Like next time you're on the toilet, just think of me and think of my survey and then go and
Yeah,
do it.
yeah. When you've just downed your caffeine and you're about to do your gym session, but you need to go to the toilet real
Exactly.
quick first.
Uh,
Um,
'Cause it's all sorry to cut across. Just to
no,
finish
you
that,
go
it's
on.
all completely anonymous. Like, so I
Mm,
can't, so that I think obviously encourages participation because like no one will know that you submitted it and what you said in it. So there's nothing that can be traced back to anyone. So I think that helps in terms of, I set it up that way obviously
yeah,
for purpose.
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Do you think that this topic in general, binge eating around men and even actually just eating disorders in general in Ireland, is it underfunded?
I don't know, to be honest. Like I don't have any figures. And I don't want to just hazard. Oh, I mean, I can hazard a guess, and I would say probably because
Mm,
it's generally those things aren't too well funded. I don't think.
yeah,
Although in fairness, like a lot of people have said to me that like if you wanted to do doctoral work on this topic, that you would get funding because it's mental health and
yeah,
it's eating disorders and at least in the context of anorexia, and eating disorders are very dangerous. So, it's a worthwhile thing to explore. But I don't actually know about funding, to be honest. So I don't want to
mm.
speculate.
Do you think that it's something that should be kind of taught a little bit more in schools?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like, I don't know like what level it's taught at in schools. Like if I reflect on like we reflect on our own time in school,
Yeah, I didn't have any.
can't exactly recall. Um, it could have been like one speaker, maybe
Yeah,
in the course of 6 years of secondary school, but I mean, it would make sense, right? Because it's that adolescent group that seems to experience more
yeah,
disordered eating. I know there are some people, all right, who go to schools and maybe talk about this stuff, or at least talk about mental health in general, and this eating disorders falls into this mental health category. But I mean, I think it would be good to have more awareness of these things because, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't know necessarily if someone's struggling with any of these things. Like much hard, like hard enough to spot something like bulimia because like you don't have the, let's say, really low body weight that you might have in an anorexia.
Yeah.
Um, and then with binge eating, like you wouldn't know if someone is binging necessarily. All you can go by is like again, parents might have some idea. Like if they find wrappers of stuff like hidden in places or something like that, that might signpost it a little bit. But generally, you wouldn't know. So
Mm.
um, it would. I think it would be certainly valuable to have more of that, yeah, in schools, so people, so the kids know what to look out for, how to, again, think about some of those protective factors that I talked about, why those are important. Um, yeah, because I think it can be quite hard at that age to, detach from the idea of like physical appearance and
Yeah.
how important that is. Um, so if they could get some support with that, I'm sure that would be of benefit. Yeah.
For fitness professionals listening, whether it's like online coaches or PTs, because I know a lot of them do listen to this podcast, do you have any advice in terms of dealing with a client who may be going through food related issues, or like creating a safer space for maybe if they're working with men to open up about these issues or anything like that?
Yeah, like I think the way you communicate is always important in these situations, and what I would classify as just kind of good coaching communication anyway. But like, you're asking open-ended questions.
Yeah.
You're being curious. You're just trying to, like you said, create that space that if they want to come into that space and have a dialogue about those things that they can. Um, you can't force anyone into talking about any of those things. But you can ask good open-ended questions. And again, that's a therapeutic technique as well. Like, so they teach us that in therapy that you need to ask open-ended questions and not closed questions. Um, so there is that. I think screening is really important. That's probably one of the biggest issues that you see because like I was talking to somebody recently who, applied to work with a coach who then referred them elsewhere, and then the referral didn't screen for eating disorders, and they had an eating disorder, and they just got put on a fat loss diet. So I suppose as like coaches, being able to screen appropriately
Could you give
for
an example of like a good screening process for a personal trainer who might be trying to take on fat loss clients?
yeah, so like at least at some level you could ask on like if you're doing a face to face or you're doing like an intake form, like ask again maybe an open-ended question like how is your relationship with food?
Mhm.
Do you have any difficulties with it that you'd like, just that you have any difficulties with it? Try to see what, and that's what I always talk to people about, like, because I have a lot of people who come to work with me to improve their relationship with food, but I don't know what that means to that person until I ask. So I have to ask, like, all right, so what does it look like right now? And what would you like to be different? And that'll give you a very good idea of what someone's struggling with and then how you might be able to help or maybe have to refer out. So you need to ask, I'd say that kind of question, like how's your relationship with food, relationship with your body potentially, um, and then definitely asking a question of like, do you have any history of an eating disorder, like past or present? Like, do you currently have an eating disorder? That's silly not to ask that question.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, if someone's maybe not going to disclose it, so you need to give people an opportunity to disclose that. And then like specifically, I would use a specific eating disorder questionnaire in my intake forms.
Hmm.
So I get people to fill that out. So that's called the eating disorder questionnaire
What would that look like?
in terms of the questions, or it's a lot of questions about. It's actually the questionnaire I'm using for my research is a condensed version of it. So the one I'm using is the EDEQ 13, so 13 questions. So it's condensed because I didn't want to make it any longer than it needed to be to try and get these questions. But it asks questions about like eating behaviors over the last month. So in terms of like trying to highlight, say, binging behavior. It'll ask questions about body dissatisfaction. It'll ask questions about dietary restraint. So it's actually there's a few kind of subheadings for it, but that's what the questions are based on. So it's dietary restraint, purging behavior, binging, body dissatisfaction. They're the main things that it covers. So there's multiple questions under those different headings, if you like,
Mm,
um, that can help assess these things, and then you can get a score calculation and see how that fits. That's maybe a bit more advanced than what some coaches might want to do, but
mm,
even the short version, the short version that I'm using in um my research, like the 13.1, because the one that I use is like 28 questions, so it's a bit longer. Um, but that is a good way to screen. It's not the only one, but I think it's probably the best overall to use as a screen. Maybe even that short version would be good because that'll give you a good idea of like where someone, and it's only a few more questions. So it's like where someone's um sort of body image at, and where somebody, and there's other questionnaires you can use for body image, but uh what's their kind of level of restraint or desire for fat loss, fasting behaviors, things like that. Are they experiencing any binging behaviors? That sort of thing. So that would be a good way, but just screening, and then uh you maybe won't always get everything disclosed like in the initial onboarding because you have to build some rapport maybe
yeah.
with a client before they'll be happy to talk about some of these things. Um, so I understand if some of this stuff comes out a bit later on in the process,
Mm,
but I think just ethically screening early is important, and
yeah.
then understanding your scope of practice, getting additional training if that's something that you want to be able to support people on, or being able to refer out if it's not
Yeah.
something that but like, you have to, you can't just assume that everyone who's looking for fat loss is in a good place
Yeah.
mentally,
Yeah.
with their body image and with their eating behaviors. So you need to plan accordingly, I would say.
Well, is this the problem where, a lot of people maybe who are coming to a fat loss coach for a fat loss, but don't realize that the issue is a lot deeper than that, that they probably have, some sort of eating disorder or disordered eating tendencies, and um, for the that coach to be able to spot them to refer out if the client itself doesn't even realize that that is the actual issue.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot, to be honest, that client will seek a coach when that might not be what they need. And like I've seen that in my own practice over the years. Like before I was trained as a therapist, like a lot of clients that like, yeah, you'd probably be better off seeing a therapist than working with a coach. But there's less stigma about
Mm,
working with a coach. I just get help with my fitness and my nutrition. And like obviously a lot of coaches are very good at the broader kind of body image work and things like that as well, definitely. So I think coaches can do a lot for people. It's just being aware of like what's your certain current skill set right now. Because I always say that it's like I'm a much better coach than I'm a much better coach now than I was obviously when I started, right? So you just
mm,
keep learning, you keep getting better. And I often reflect on that. I was like, geez, yeah, there's a lot of people there in the early days of coaching that I probably didn't help that well compared to how I could help them now. But I don't think you can avoid that,
no,
unfortunately.
no, it's almost it's printed into the process, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but having the kind of awareness of that, and obviously striving to do your best and understand what it is to like work ethically and not just put everybody on fat loss diets without knowing what their headspace is or how they might respond to that, Because and then also because like it's not like everybody is a bad candidate for fat loss either, right? So
Yeah.
don't want to do that. Like we're talking about a more specific group, but in general, the body image side of things is
Mm,
probably underappreciated and therefore should be brought in more generally, let's
mm.
say.
Brilliant. What changes would you like to see in how like binge eating is discussed or diagnosed or treated in men?
Yeah, I mean, like I'd like to see I'd like to see more men in the research treatment
Yeah.
processes because like I just wonder how targeted are the treatments for men compared to women if the majority of research participants are women and therefore the treatments are it's just by default then targeting that kind of group. So I just wonder like is there anything that we should do differently when it comes to treating men with these sorts of things? I don't necessarily I'm not saying that's the case, but
It's an interesting thought.
yeah, we don't really know is the problem because of that kind of lack of men in the research setting. So yeah, I would like for people obviously to be generally more aware of well, eating disorders in men in general, because it's definitely underappreciated. I think the awareness is pretty good for women in terms of eating disorders. But again, that's maybe part of the problem because it's considered then a feminine thing.
Mm,
So just to appreciate that, look, men have eating disorders, certainly binge eating disorder, a lot of men have, and then and that's just the again the clinically diagnosed um version as opposed to like people who struggle with disordered eating in general.
hmm
That's going to be subclinical. So don't actually even know if I answered that question earlier properly, but like basically subclinical would just be like the frequency doesn't meet that clinical frequency.
mm,
Um, Essentially that's what the main difference would be. So it'd still be like engaging in binge eating, but not necessarily at that kind of frequency, or maybe not for as long. Um, that'd be the main difference, I think, because I
Is
think
that is that an issue with people not getting treated then if it's not if they can't get diagnosed quickly enough as clinical?
yeah, because like it's maybe hard to diagnose as well. Because like I wouldn't diagnose anybody with an eating disorder.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be my case. It would be like a psychologist or a GP or sort of a combination. So I can use these questionnaires and stuff, but like even those like a self-administered questionnaire is not technically like a diagnostic tool. You know?
Mm.
So
Does it take long to get diagnosed? Because like you said, that sometimes people can be waiting 6 years to be treated almost.
yeah, I mean, it shouldn't take that long to get diagnosed. Provided I suppose you talk to the right people. And like the Body Wise as the eating disorder charity in Ireland, like they do really good work.
Yeah.
They have great resources actually, like in terms of their podcasts and YouTube videos, and their website is really good. So they do a lot of good work. And my clinical supervisor, because I have to work with a clinical supervisor to talk about the therapy I do with my clients. So.
Oh yes, I remember talking to a therapist. I had her on the podcast, and I remember she said that to me that every therapist needs to have their own therapist, basically.
Yeah, so you have your own therapist, but then you also have a supervisor. So you
Mm.
get therapy, and then you also talk to basically like a mentoring role, really.
Yeah.
Because then I go in and I talk about the sessions that I was doing and how I was doing certain things, and they'll say, well, like, why did you do that? Or if I get stuck.
Game strategy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So if I get stuck as well with somebody and I'm not sure, where to go next with them,
Mm.
that can be super helpful. But she's very involved in Body Wise, which is why I sought her out as a supervisor because I wanted that specific support. Because I suppose there's not that many people who specialize in eating disorders realistically, um, in a therapeutic sense. So, it's important to get the right supervision and then the right treatment as well.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I would like more awareness. I would like just to be more information about what it's like in Ireland because we don't have a lot of data on that. Like you can kind of extrapolate from other countries, and like I said, it doesn't seem to vary too much country to country. It seems to be kind of a global thing in terms of binge eating. Um, but yeah, I suppose just to be aware that it's not like a feminine thing, and men need support in terms of how they relate to their thoughts and feelings, just like women do, and that they can get help for it as well, and they're definitely not the only people dealing with it because I think that's one of the biggest issues. I know that's kind of a trope at this stage, but like
Yeah.
like I was saying, all those, especially those kind of gap players and stuff that I work with, that you know, I would very much think that they think they're the only ones on the team, dealing with it, and they could be, but they're not the only one in all the teams in Ireland dealing with it.
Mm. How do you how do you? It's very difficult to think of how you change that culture. Um, for more people to be okay with speaking about it, so then you have more data to pull from. Like I suppose you probably need, like, even if you look at it from the GAA context, I suppose you probably need like a big name to come out and talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, practitioners like myself can do as much as we can to share that, like, look, people like this
Hmm.
have trouble with these things. But then it's like, it's like, why aren't people willing to talk about it? And that points back to probably the cultural
Yeah.
perception of it, that it's
Yeah.
like what does it mean for me as a man to struggle with binge eating
Mm,
disorder? And what is it like, what does it mean for me as a man to have an eating disorder or
mm,
disordered eating? You know, it's like what does that mean to the person, and then what creates resistance to maybe talking about that? Like, how do they think they'll be perceived?
mm,
These are all the things that would limit those conversations. So yeah, it's not definitely not easy. But at least we can bring more awareness to the matter, and uh, keep talking about it. And see if people did come out, and you will get people who are courageous. And you do see that in athletes, for example. I think like Freddie Flintoff talked about
yeah. Yeah,
an
that's a good
eating
example.
disorder and things like that. So you have people who do have the courage to talk about it. But again, it's like, what say, like, what do we think about him now as a result of talking about it? Like, we don't think anything bad of him.
Mm,
At least I don't think so. But it's
no.
like, so that's the, it's like, what are people worried about? That, like, if I said to one of the lads on the team, they're like, oh, I'm actually struggling with, binge eating. It depends obviously on
Mm,
the relationship, but it's like, what are they afraid of, I guess.
yeah.
I don't know. I'm saying you haven't answered that question either.
No, no. Like I was just thinking to myself as you were speaking there, I was like, yeah, I can understand. Like someone will look at like Freddie Flintoff or something like that and be like, oh yeah, fair, well done, fair play to him on coming out and think nothing negative about him. But for some reason, when it's them, they feel like, oh, but my situation will be different. I'll be judged.
Yeah.
Which
Judge
is
how though? Like, say again, I don't want you to answer that, but like,
yeah.
how are someone going to be judged? Is someone going to be like, I don't know. I can't even like verbalize like what might be the concern, like that they.
Yeah. Well, I think your own insecurities are always feel bigger than anyone else's insecurities, don't they?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. If someone was listening to this and they, especially in the context of men, because in the context of men, it's like, oh yeah, well, my problem's not that bad. You know what I mean? I'll get on with it. So, like, if someone might be struggling with food or feels like they're struggling with food, but don't think that it's serious enough to get help or to reach out, what would you say to them?
My assessment for that kind of thing is always like, is it like, what's it costing you to keep
Mm,
carrying on with this potentially? So like, is it causing distress in your life? Like, how is it impacting your life? And would it be worth trying to change that
mm,
based on how it is? Um, and like, kind of interesting, this is kind of a side tangent, but like, say for saying it, like acceptance and commitment therapy, like one of the, as the name suggests, it's a lot of it is about acceptance of thoughts and feelings as they are without getting the terms they use are fused to them, without getting fused to them, so they influence behavior. So I often share this with clients, that like the guy who developed ACT as a therapy, he has tinnitus, right?
mhm,
So, you know what that is? So, well, it's like a chronic ringing in your ears that doesn't really abate. So, it's a medical condition to have tinnitus, and a big part of him applying the therapy that he developed to that was like, because he came from a place of like being suicidal, because like I have this fucking constant ringing in my ears, and like I can't deal with that,
yeah.
to learning basically to accept it. And then the other part of like ACT therapy is also acceptance, and then the commitment part. And the commitment is just to action that serves you well in your life and it's meaningful. And it's like, so kind of you boil it down, it's like whatever's going on for you is going on for you. How do you continue acting in a way that's meaningful for you that will lead to a meaningful life or a meaningful living? Um, so I just say that as well because it's like, can someone have some negative thought patterns? In the kind of the act treatment of that, it would be like, again, that separation from the thoughts. So it's like they're just words. So you may have them, but you can still live your life anyway, without it being something that you fuse to and then it influences your behavior and it makes you, sorry, like act in ways that you don't want to act, whether
Mm.
that's like avoiding things or doing things that you don't want to do. So I just throw that in there because like, you know, I'm just, I suppose, arguing with myself now about like, is there an element of like, can you carry on? Like, where's the limit on carrying on? As you said, like if you're kind of, it's not that big a deal.
Mm. Yeah, like you said there, I completely understand what you're saying there. It's like, well, like, can you accept that and say, all right, I have these thoughts, but I can still, park them and still actually get on with my life and have a good quality of life. But I suppose it's if it's like you said, if it's causing you to not have a good quality of life, then like that's when it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and like even in that example, like if someone is, dealing with something like binge eating on a lower level, it's still probably related to like thoughts and feelings that they're having, and then obviously that is not a committed action that they want to take in terms of binge eating necessarily. So you still will work to address it. Um, but yeah, look, I just do think it's like, right, how much of an impact is this having on me? Would I like it to be different? Would it be worth exploring how I could change it and make it different? Um, so yeah, and just the fact that like a lot of people do struggle with this stuff. So, and it can be quite complicated, when you consider like the interpersonal contributions and the mood contributions and um, the body image side and the dietary restriction and where that comes from and all that sort of stuff, low self-esteem, those kind of things. So like, the eating is the symptom. Um,
Yeah,
but
I always like that saying like it's rarely or it's never about the food.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the food is like it's very if someone wants to eat as a coping mechanism, it's effective, it's easy to access. As soon as you learn that, then it can become kind of habitual. So you just, if I'm feeling a certain way, then I end up eating to either make myself feel better momentarily, or at least just block out how I'm feeling. Because that's the kind of mindlessness of binge eating is like you're tuned out, which is why I use so much mindful eating in the treatment of it. Because you can't eat mindfully and binge like those two things are opposed,
Mm.
can't coexist, I don't think. Um, so yeah, what what harm in seeking help if it is something that is maybe bothering That's what I would say to answer that question after my several tangents.
No, I love that. I really appreciate the work you do. I think it's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you take this. If anyone wanted to keep up with the work you do, or reach out, or anything like that, even have any questions about this, where can they go to find you, Brian?
Yeah, the best place would be just to go to my Instagram, which is at Brian hÁonghusa. It's OHAON. I mean, if you put that into Instagram, you probably get it at that stage. But OHAONGHUSA, and you find me there. Um, yeah, and then we have content and stuff on the Triage Method website. I've done actually a lot of podcasts on some of these topics, obviously this one included. Um, so I do have a playlist, I think, linked in my Instagram with all the podcasts I've been on. Let's talking about a lot of the same things in fairness, but there are those. But yeah, Instagram basically is the best place to find me and to talk about any of these things. And I do try and make content, not extremely consistently, but do my best.
You have your hands full, to be fair, and we'll obviously put all the links on the description as well. And what about the survey? Is that still open if people wanted to fill it out? Or can I attach that to the end of the podcast as well?
Yeah, please. When will this go out?
This will go out probably in the next day or two, I'd say.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, no, it's going to be open for another couple of weeks, I'd say,
Okay,
maybe.
brilliant.
So yeah, that would be great. If anyone wants to, again, if you meet that criteria that you're a man in Ireland, you train at least a couple of times a week, then you can fill in my survey. Doesn't, not that it doesn't matter, but like it doesn't, there's no exclusion about if you have eating issues or anything like that. So yeah, that would be good if anyone's listening to this, and because I know you shared it already, Carl. So a few people did all right. Fill it in at that stage. But yeah, the more the merrier. We do need another few, so that would be good.
All right, brilliant. Right, Brian, listen, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate this conversation. And that is, I think, episode 80 of the Uneducated PT podcast. So we're on our way to number 100. Brian, thanks again for today.
Thanks, Carl.